I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to chat more. I appreciate you sharing more about mentorship professionally in your experience, both receiving and the ways that you've enjoyed providing mentorship calls for other people. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts about seeking mentorship for your personal experiences as opposed to professional, if there is any difference, how you kind of see those avenues changing and evolving over the years, especially as there are more like online workshops and like virtual things that people can find for education. Um, while there are still also clubs and things. Thank you.
Thank you. Very thorough question. God, I'm taking notes. Okay, so first, thank you for noticing that I am giving mentoring calls. I'm also starting to give in-person training sessions. I'm sort of deciding whether that works for me by doing a few sort of trial and sort of test runs. But I guess I've been doing this professionally for what, like up to almost 14 years now. And I like a little change and just switch things up a bit. And I mean, people ask me all the time about learning from me, and I respond to feedback. So that's why I introduced the mentoring calls. And then what sort of has come out of some of those calls quite naturally is in-person training sessions when things do align. And I've enjoyed those trials. So maybe making it more formal is a thing. It's testing it out. But receiving mentorship. So this has happened in different ways throughout my life, mostly in professional capacities. So prior to my work as a dominatrix, if you've been following, I'm sorry for repeating this story a bazillion times, but I used to work in a more corporate sector. And part of that was strategic consulting, part of that was research, part of that was culture writing, it was a lot of stuff. But sometimes I would come across people who I would work with mostly who would want to sort of like take me under their wing and make suggestions and help me connect with people. And I didn't realize that was what mentoring is. So it was quite a casual sort of helpful sort of thing. And that was very useful in helping me understand a little bit more about what could be possible for me. And I remember those people very dearly, and I'm very grateful. And when I moved into the domination sphere, to the professional domination sphere, I worked in a dungeon. And so it was a facility with a lot of other mistresses. And part of the training process, the structure is that you would shadow other mistresses, and those mistresses were encouraged by our headmistress to take in the newbies and teach them little bits and pieces. And so it was mostly like a shadowing thing. And it wasn't really like a formal, you are assigned to this mistress thing. However, maybe I would say two really stood out to me. One was more at a distance, and one I was more socially connected with. I'm not sure if people would want their names mentioned. But one of them was someone who I met on my first day, and they showed me around the house and were so smart in the questions they were asking me. Things like, have you ever worked in BDSM before? Well, what? No. Do you practice it personally? No. So why are you here? What are you drawn to? The psychological aspect, I think, is quite intriguing to me. And they said, well, that's going to be the hardest thing to learn. So at least that's a good place to start. They taught me cleaning the first day, and they were always very, very generous in their explanations of things that I would mess up. Yeah, but I did feel like that was at a bit more of a distance, but respectful distance, totally cool. But there was somebody else who who I remember very, very fondly, who would start by telling me little things. Like, I had no concept of what like gel nails or acrylic nails were. I barely painted my nails like prior to this occupation. I didn't know really that it was a thing that people did. Now I do it like every 2-3 weeks. But like, she would tell me how to maintain them by rubbing like moisturizer around my cuticles. I'm like, what are cuticles? I barely moisturized. I still kind of don't really. It's an extra step. But, little things like this, to like making suggestions on, oh, I only have one latex piece, but it's enough. It's like, a dress is really easy to get on. This is the kind of lube that I use to like wash it in, to I know how to do that. Let me come and show you. And so I would say that she was maybe my mentor star, whether she thought about it or not. But she was so lovely. And I eventually, like when the dungeon closed, we would do doubles together outside of the dungeon. And yeah, it was really, really nourishing to be able to have that exchange. It was very fun, and I will always remember them so fondly. But that's me receiving, I guess. And now I have the great privilege to be, yeah, sure, I've been in this for like 14 years, but there are still people who are working who have been in this for like decades, like Isabella Sinclair and Troy Orleans, two people who I'm very lucky to be connected with. And Yin Q also. And these are elders in the community, so to speak, in the working community, that I get to have like seen their career shift and progress, and their branding changes, and their language, and their facilities, and their ambitions. And it's nice, I guess, to be able to see what is possible. And those three that I've mentioned are totally different from each other in terms of how they want to advertise or the things that they're interested in. And it's nice to see the diversity of what is possible. And that's a really special thing about this job also, is that individual personalities can have a lot of room to establish and explore and create. And so even though we share a title of dominatrix, or have shared that title, the possibilities of what that can look like can be so interestingly unique. And it's nice to see that existing in them. And I would like that possibility continues. But that does bring me to, I guess, a point when you mention these workshops and these like schools. And it's very interesting that this job that is still somewhat sidelined from society and is kind of, less so, but still a little bit looked down upon, this sex work sector. But yet we have more and more commercialization of the learning of it. And I think that access to knowledge and education is great. It's so new a concept to me that I am still navigating as to what I think about it and how I feel about it. Like, I've met a lot of people who've done some like courses in some more shorter form things, and they've drawn things that are useful from that. I've met some people who have done things in longer form things, and it was not as beneficial as they thought, and it left them lacking, even though they had spent like a lot of money on it. So I guess it's just like any sort of potential educational institution or opportunities, and that you need to be discerning and do your research and know what your outcomes or the outcomes that you're potentially interested in are before you go in, which can be harder, but harder to be aware of. But I think at least a little bit of that sort of that sort of fact finding for yourself is going to be useful before you commit to thinking that you're going to get anything out of them, including my mentoring calls, including my trainings. I guess it's better that people feel aligned with the brand, the stuff that I put out, the way that I speak, and you're going to get more value if you already sort of align with that, I guess. Maybe is kind of how you could be more discerning about the potential opportunities, learning opportunities. So how do people go about seeking mentorship? I guess for me, it's all been quite natural. When I wanted learning experiences, I went to an institution or I went to a BDSM dungeon. I went to facilities, but like on an individual level, I don't think I ever really understood until quite recently as to the value of seeking out an individual's attention. I think I've always been much more institutional in some ways. And so I guess maybe I'm not the best person for that question. But maybe if I think about how people come towards me, it's going to be like what I just explained, and understand that there's an alignment of values and there's going to be limitations to what you're going to get out of it. But it also might feel more valuable to you because of the alignment already. And I think when it comes to domination, there is a lot that stresses on like the headspace and some of the craft, but I think there's not enough around the business. Obviously, if it's just about understanding the potential of your personality, then that's one sector, but we're not talking about being a dominatrix anymore, because at least to me, the term being a dominatrix is the profession, yeah? And it's basically customer service. And do a small business course, Sadly, we're not allowed in a lot of countries to work in facilities or en masse or as cooperatives or however yet, maybe one day. And so it's very much an individual sort of business. And so I think that can be quite lacking. And understanding the space also between the brand and yourself can be useful. And maybe there's some overlap when it comes to like caring industries and learning from those in terms of boundaries and ways that you can approach the job and self-care. But I think there's some sort of things that are lacking around there in the workshops, schools that I sort of see. But they target specific approaches, and fine, right? It's about doing due diligence before you sort of commit. And the personal versus the professional, in my mentoring calls that I give, it's at the beginning, it was very, very professional. It was like people who would like to do my job or who are doing my job, being dominatrices. They wanted like very specific questions around how to operate within that. And that still happens, but I would say it's pretty even split between personal and professional these days. So in terms of like couples, like talking to me about how they would like to bring more power dynamics into their lives, how they would like to maybe explore kink, or individuals trying to navigate sexuality. And I'm not like a therapist, and I make sure everybody knows this, but I'm very happy to have a conversation and reflect upon my experience. And there are a lot of people who would like to understand my personality and how they could maybe draw some of those qualities out for themselves. So I would say that's quite personal, as opposed to, sure, useful in a professional sense, but it's quite a personal sort of scenario. And so, yeah, it's a pretty 50-50 split on the calls. It's quite interesting. Not what I could have imagined at the beginning when I first started offering these. But how would one go about finding a personal mentor as opposed to a professional? Again, I'm not really somebody that on an individual level sees hierarchy like this-ish, or I feel like there's an ongoing, I prefer like an exchange, an equal-ish exchange. And I think that when it comes to the mentor dynamic, it's kind of like implied that you like to support, but that the information is almost one unidirectional in a way. And I guess when it comes to individual relationships, I tend to prefer that not to be the case. So yeah, I feel like it just doesn't suit how I like to interact on a personal level. Yeah. And when I was younger, I basically want to bring something to the table, is what I'm saying. Yeah. And people do that via the mentoring and the training via what they pay. Obviously, some of them are lovely, and I get to experience that personality, and that's wonderful. And it's my contribution also, after being in this for so long, to be able to, just be a resource is also valuable to me. Okay, yes, sure. So all these things are valuable. But I guess informationally, I don't like to be the be all and end all. And I kind of feel like it's a little bit like implied like that, right? Anyway, maybe something I have to navigate, not your problem. But clubs. And by clubs, this person meant like leather organizations. If you're not aware of what that is, it is something that originated from like leather culture, which is, I might be wrong, but something around like the bikies sort of like gang culture, sort of meeting gay culture, and that aesthetic sort of transferring, and the hierarchy also, and that proliferating into other sort of subcultures also. So there's quite a distinct gay, male, heavy leather sort of subculture club sort of thing. And then there's like a queer folk sort of version. Yeah. And so do we call some of them are formalized, some of them are not. So how does mentoring sort of factor into these? So the first time that I sort of had a personal brush up against that sort of culture was in New York. And it's still with people who call themselves Leather Family. And there's a little bit of a hierarchy. Like there are elders, people who have been in the scene for a long time, who sort of are like our guides or are our resource and available and to set standards, but are also it's pretty good in this particular community, where they are very nurturing to seeing the young people within that community lead. And yes, there's a lot of literal leather being worn, and there are identities within it that are associated with leather, like boot blacks, people who enjoy the maintenance of leather. But so this is like a formal, informal, hierarchical subculture group where it is about facilitating a sense of community and knowledge sharing and accountability. And how useful are these in terms of a mentoring capacity or an informational building capacity for oneself? It really depends heavily on the quality of the group. Because I'm sure that all of these parameters are beautiful parameters that are rife for taking advantage of people. And I think that approaching them with a great observation, and even though it feels potentially good to be able to release and surrender into something that looks very potentially nurturing, I think it requires a lot of due diligence also. So I guess that's a common theme, isn't it? That if you're going to release into these spaces of being nurtured and learning, that you should always be a bit watchful, as well as have done some understanding of what it is that you want out of it and who these people are, in order to potentially not get taken advantage of and get the most that you can out of it, but also with a sense of open-mindedness and a sense of understanding that the outcomes may not be exactly what you thought because of the information that you might find out. So I hope that was useful. And if you're interested in chatting to me about your lives and your work, I make it very available at eva-o.com/training. You can book a Calendly time with me, very easy. And then I'm starting to offer those training in-person sessions, where currently I'm thinking it's more of an observational piece, where you come in and I sort of involve you a little bit here and there in how I run a session. So you get to kind of observe how I run everything. And with that, you're going to get things like how I am, how I move in space, what I ask. And these are all things that are quite different to how I am normally in my day-to-day. I utilize some of these skills, but it's quite specific to a session space and getting what I want out of someone in a very particular point of time. But yeah, I hope that was useful. It was very interesting for me to formulate all of that in that structure. And I'm very curious to see how all of these learning groups, communities, classes, or whatever around sex work and domination in particular, which seems to have a lot of traction behind it, how they evolve. Yeah. I guess my stance on all of that right now is information is great when you understand that, when you don't let it limit you either. Yeah. But thank you for listening, and speak with you next time.